Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to do a deep dive into the first widely reported alien cattle mutilation case. It occurred in April of 1897 in Leroy, Kansas, and it involved a gentleman named Alexander Hamilton. He was a lawyer and a teacher, and from all accounts he was a very prominent and well-respected citizen. But there was an article appeared a few days after this incident, which occurred on April 19th, 1897, in a local newspaper, and it had a sworn statement, the article, from Alexander Hamilton about an incident that occurred on his ranch on Monday, April 19th, and there were two other witnesses there, including his son Wallace, who was about 16 or 17 years old at the time, and a tenant named Gid Heslip. Now, this story appeared in this local Kansas newspaper, and then from there it became international news. It was something that was, after that, for the decades after that, it was reprinted, and after so many years, people would still talk about it. But then in 1977, there was an article that appeared in Fate magazine, written by a very famous UFO researcher named Jerome Clark, where he asserted that it was a hoax. But that's what we're going to get to the bottom to today. Was it a hoax? We're going to try to figure that out today in this episode. Anyway, when this article, the original article, first appeared, what we're going to talk about right now is the sworn statement that was written, sworn testimony from Alexander Hamilton. That's what we're going to read right now. And this is what he stated. He said, "Last Monday night, about 10:30, we were awakened by a noise among the cattle. I arose thinking that perhaps my bulldog was performing pranks, but upon going to the door, saw to my utter astonishment that an airship was slowly descending upon my cow lot about 40 rods or 600 feet from the house. Calling my tenant Gid Heslip and my son Wall, we seized some axes and ran to the corral. Meanwhile, the ship had been gently descending until it was not more than 30 feet above the ground, and we came within 50 yards of it. It consisted of a great cigar-shaped portion, possibly 300 feet long, with a carriage underneath. The carriage was made of some glass or some other transparent substance, alternating with a narrow strip of some material. It was brightly lighted within, and everything was plainly visible. It was occupied by 6 of the strangest beings I ever saw. They were jabbering together, but we could not understand a word they said. Every part of the vessel which was not transparent was of a dark reddish color. We stood mute with wonder and fright. Then some noise attracted their attention, and they turned a light directly upon us. Immediately on catching sight of us, they turned on some unknown power, and a great turbine wheel about 30 feet in diameter, which was revolving slowly below the craft, began to buzz, and the vessel rose slightly as a bird. When about 300 feet above us, it seemed to pause and to hover directly above a 2-year-old heifer, which was bawling and jumping, apparently fast in the fence. Going to her, we found some material fastened in a slip knot around her neck and going up to the vessel from the heifer tangled in the wire fence. We tried to get it off but could not, so we cut the wire loose to see the ship, heifer and all, rise slowly, disappearing in the northwest. We went home, but I was so frightened I could not sleep. Rising early Tuesday, I started out on my horse, hoping to find some trace of my cow. This I failed to do, but coming back in the evening found that Link Thomas, about 3 or 4 miles west of Leroy, had found the hide, legs, and head in his field that day. He, thinking that someone had butchered a stolen beast, had brought the hide to town for identification, but was greatly mystified in not being able to find any tracks in the soft ground. After identifying the hide by my brand, I went home, but every time I would drop to sleep, I would see the cursed thing with its big lights and hideous people. I don't know whether they are devils or angels or what, but we all saw them, and my whole family saw the ship, and I don't want any more to do with them." Okay, so that wasn't enough. There was also this story came along with an impressive affidavit that was signed by a whole bunch of other respectable people from this region, and it says here, "As there are now, always have been, and always will be skeptics and unbelievers whenever the truth or anything bordering on the improbable is presented, and knowing that some ignorant or suspicious people will doubt the truthfulness of the above statement now, therefore we, the undersigned, do hereby make the following affidavit that we have known Alexander Hamilton from 1 to 30 years, and that for truth and veracity we have never heard his word questioned, and that we do verily believe his statement to be true and correct." And then it has this impressive array of 12 different names here who signed this other affidavit to attest to the veracity of Alexander Hamilton, including a state oil inspector, the sheriff, a banker, a doctor, a pharmacist, and another attorney, a justice of the peace, a couple of druggists, register of deeds, the postmaster, and a deputy sheriff. And that was signed on the 21st day of April of 1897. They attested to his truthfulness and veracity. They believed him, and they did not believe he was lying, according to these sworn affidavits. But was he lying? Was he lying? Some people say he was, and that's what we're going to talk about. Anyway, about a week ago, there was a post on UFO Reddit, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And this was posted by someone named, who goes by the handle of Tweed Bolt Megacorp, and the headline reads, "The 1897 Leroy, Kansas airship story, a classic UFO case where the debunking is less credible than the testimony." And here's what it says about this case. It says, "Hey everyone, I've been digging into the 1897 Alexander Hamilton airship case, often cited as the first alleged UFO-related cattle mutilation, and I'm finding that the accepted hoax explanation rests on far shakier ground than the original notarized testimony. More recent research seems to confirm this." And then he provides an accounting of the original story. It says here, "For a quick summary, this is one of the foundational stories of the great airship wave of the 1890s. So let's just stop there for a second. Yeah, leading up to this, since late 1896, there was all these airship reports. People across the United States were seeing airships, giant craft, in the cigar-shaped craft for the most part, flying around the United States. And there was stories, hundreds of stories, if not thousands of stories, in all different newspapers across the country on a regular basis. So then all of a sudden this happens. And I just want to point out too, and we'll get into this later, but this alleged incident involving Alexander Hamilton happened on April 19th, just 2 days after the April 17th incident involving an alleged crash of a UFO in Aurora, Texas, and the discovery of an apparent alien creature. And we're going to talk about that later on. But anyway, before we get into this account, I want to go to this article from Fate magazine from 1977. And this is where Jerome Clark, he's a very well-known UFO researcher, he wrote this article, and he says that it was a hoax. That's what he came to that determination. And we're going to, but was he right to say this? Was he right to reach this conclusion? I mean, everyone has their own opinion, right? But he asserts it. He says it is a hoax. He doesn't give it any room for any possibility of being real. He just says it is a hoax. And since that time, a lot of people, UFO researchers, people who read this subject, just assume that this incident was a hoax. And we're going to talk about that here a little bit. And we're going to start off where he claims it was a hoax. He says, "It is, however, a hoax." Deeper in the article here, that's what he writes. He says, "The truth about the affair was published in the January 28th, 1943 issue of an obscure Kansas weekly newspaper, the Buffalo Enterprise. The week before, it had reprinted Hamilton's account, which brought this letter from Ed F. Hudson, who in 1897 had been editor of the Yates Center Farmers Advocate." Now, I just want to stop there for a second. The Yates Center Farmers Advocate was the original publication that printed Hamilton's story, his statement, and that's where it originally appeared. And from there, it just spread across the entire world. And the story was that big. Anyway, so this is what happened here. He says, the week before it had been reprinted, they reprinted it in this Buffalo Enterprise newspaper, and then there was this letter that came a week afterward from this guy named Ed Hudson, who claimed in 1897 he was the editor of the Yates Center Farmers Advocate, where Hamilton's story originally appeared. And this is according to this letter that Hudson sent to the Buffalo Enterprise. It said this. It says, I had just bought and installed a little gasoline engine, the first I believe to come to Yates Center, using it to run my machinery, replacing the hand power on the old country Campbell press and kicking the job presses. I invited many of my friends into the back shop to see the engine work. Hamilton was one of them. He exclaimed, "Now they can fly," hence the airship story that we made up. So basically this guy, Hudson, was saying in 1943 that he, and along with other people in Hamilton, they made this story up and then printed it in his newspaper. So continuing here, he says, after we had published it, the story was copied in many of the largest newspapers in the country, England, France, and Germany, some illustrating it with pen-drawn imaginings by their staff artists. There were also hundreds of inquiries from every part of the globe. Soon afterward, there came the various experiments in flight, but I have always maintained that Alexander Hamilton was the real inventor of human flight. So this guy Hudson was claiming that he believes that people got more interested in flight just because of Hamilton's story about this cow getting stolen and then later found 3 or 4 miles away, mutilated. And then the article continues here. It says, Ben S. Hudson, Ed Hudson's son and the publisher of the Fredonia Daily Herald, explained in an accompanying note that his father and Hamilton had concocted that story following a Saturday afternoon powwow, which was customary for Saturdays in those days. So nobody really knew about this story that came out in 1943 because it was in this obscure newspaper, the Buffalo Enterprise, right? But then in the mid-1970s, there was this reporter found this article, discovered it while he was doing some research. And here's what Clark writes about that. It says, an American correspondent of R.J.M. Rickard, editor of England's Fortean Times, discovered the article in 1976 while engaged in a historical research project. Rickard, in turn, sent me a copy of the story, seeking confirmation for Hudson's claims. I published a letter in the September 16th, 1976 Yates Center News soliciting further information. So what Clark did here, he posted, he wanted to see if he could find any corroboration. So he published a letter in this Yates Center News, where that's the area in Kansas where this story originated from, and he wanted to see if anybody there could remember what really happened there. If it was this really a hoax like this person in 1943 was claiming? So this is what happened. It says, in reply, Mrs. Donna Stevie of Wichita, Kansas, wrote that her 93-year-old mother, Ethel L. Shaw, had actually heard of the tale from Alexander Hamilton himself. Mrs. Shaw, who was hard of hearing but otherwise fully alert, supplied this statement. So it's basically this lady, Donna Stevie, says her 93-year-old mother, Ethel Shaw, she was there. She was 14 years old at the time, right? And she was living in that area, and she just happened to be visiting the Hamiltons one day when this happened. This is what she states. This is what the 93-year-old woman wrote to Jerome Clark. She wrote, how well I remember that beautiful afternoon, almost as though it were yesterday. I, as a young girl about 14 years old, was visiting in the Hamilton home with Mrs. Hamilton and their daughter Nell, when Mr. Hamilton came home from town, put up his team, and came into the sitting room where we were visiting. He pulled up a chair and almost immediately began relating this story by saying, Ma, I fixed up quite a story and told the boys in town, and it will come out in the Advocate this weekend. He seemed quite elated over what he had done, but Mrs. Hamilton was rather shocked at what he had told him, and at times would remark, oh, Alex, oh, or why, Alex? But it didn't disturb us girls, as we felt it was just a fabricated story, yet I pondered a little over it as I walked along on my way home that evening. I told my parents about it, but they gave it no concern, saying, pay no attention to it, as it's just another of his stories. It seems there were a few men round about who had formed a club which they called Ananias, or Liars Club. They would get together once in a while to see which one could tell the biggest story. They'd concocted since their last meeting. Well, to my knowledge, the club soon broke up after the airship and cow story. I guess that one had topped them all, and the Hamilton family went down in history. And then Jerome Clark continues, he writes, Mrs. Stevie adds that the men who signed the affidavit, friends of Hamilton's, knew it to be a falsehood but simply went along with it for the fun. Together they fooled the whole world and perpetrated the biggest hoax ever known in UFO history. So, since 1977, that's what people have been believing, that this story, right, was a giant hoax, and it just nobody really knew it until for the most part, until 1977. He was doing his research on this in 1976. The Fate magazine article appeared in February of 1977, and since that time, a lot of people had just assumed that this whole thing is a hoax. But is it a hoax? Is it a hoax? Now, I want to go back to that Reddit post. Okay, now this continues here. They talks about the original account. It says, for a quick summary, this is one of the foundational stories of the great airship waves of the 1890s. The witness, Alexander Hamilton of Leroy, Kansas, a highly respected community member, a lawyer, teacher, former state legislator, and a member of the House of Representatives. The event, Hamilton claimed an airship appeared over his cattle pen. He and his family saw roughly 6 strange beings on board. The craft abducted one of his heifers, and its butchered remains were found the next day. And here the corroboration, Hamilton produced a notarized affidavit attesting to his character and truthfulness, signed by 11 other prominent local citizens, including the sheriff, a banker, a doctor, and a justice of the peace. Actually, I believe it was 12. Anyway, the hoax explanation, which came out in the 1970s. The modern debunking seems to trace back almost entirely to researcher Jerome Clark's work in the 1970s. The claim, Clark reported receiving a letter from E.D. Hudson, who claimed he and Hamilton invented the story as part of a local liars club. That's not exactly true. It was actually the 1943 report that he got, and then he went and got this other information from this 93-year-old woman. The corroboration, a 93-year-old woman allegedly recalled a conversation 79 years prior where Hamilton admitted it was a fabrication. Actually, it was a 93-year-old woman who was stating that that there was a liars club. There was absolutely no evidence that there was some sort of a liars club in that Leroy, Kansas region at the time. Anyway, continuing here, he says, why the debunking is so weak. When you weigh the evidence, the hoax story seems far less believable. On one hand, we have a contemporary notarized document signed by 12 named public figures. On the other, we have an unverified claim and a 79-year-old memory, both reported secondhand by a single researcher 80 years later. But it gets even weaker. According to Christopher O'Brien's 2014 book, Stalking the Herd, there are major problems with the debunking story. O'Brien notes he can find no published corroboration of the debunking letters Jerome Clark cites. We only have Clark's report of them. He also could find no independent evidence that a liars club ever existed in or near Leroy. And then there was another aspect to this, the confession that wasn't. This is the most crucial part. The debunking narrative sometimes claims Hamilton later wrote a letter admitting his lie. O'Brien's research shows that this confession was in fact a masterclass in sarcasm written to a newspaper editor who was pestering him. Here is what Hamilton actually wrote. Yours of the May 27th came in due time, but I had so many of the same kind to answer that I have just reached your letter, and in answer to your inquiry about the airship, will freely confess to you, as you are an editor, that I lied about it. I am sure now that it was a lightning bug and a cow hair in one foot and an ant crawling up the hair. I must have taken the lightning bug for the airship, the hair for the cable, and the ant for the cow. The whole thing must have been an optical illusion. Now, my dear sir, please do not say anything about this letter, for you are the only person that I have confessed the truth to, and I only do this because you are an editor, and I will not lie to the editor of a county newspaper intentionally. Yours, with respect, Alexander Hamilton. And then the OP here posts, this is obviously not a serious confession. It's the letter of a man fed up with being called a liar, responding with dripping sarcasm. To present this as a genuine mea culpa is incredibly disingenuous. And then there's a final wrinkle to this debunking story here. To add another layer of intrigue, O'Brien's research partner David Perkins unearthed a public notice from the Kansas City Journal showing that an Alexander Hamilton resigned as Woodson County Justice of the Peace just 3 days after the reported event. One could speculate that this was due to public embarrassment or pressure from reporting his experiences. Okay, and then he asked this guy asked some questions here. He says, given this, the case seems wide open. The debunking appears to rely on secondhand accounts that can't be verified and a confession that was clearly a sarcastic joke. Has anyone ever found independent evidence of this liars club or the original debunking letters cited by Clark? How should we interpret Hamilton's resignation? Was he being ridiculed? Most importantly, why is the sarcastic letter still sometimes presented as a straight confession and the original notarized affidavit from 12 men so easily dismissed? It feels like a classic case of a weak debunking becoming accepted fact. What am I missing? Okay, now I want to scoot over to this Stalking the Herd article. And this was written by Christopher O'Brien. This is what he was talking about. And here's what he writes in this book. He writes, Clark revealed this, after he lays out what Clark was reporting in his article in Fate from 1977, and then O'Brien writes this. He says, Clark revealed this debunking of the case in an article published in Fate magazine in February of 1977. He claimed that the whole incident was a joke perpetrated by Hamilton as a professed member of a local liars club, and he cites an affidavit filed to that effect published in May 7th, 1897, Kansas City Times. An article was supposedly published revisiting the Hamilton case in the Buffalo Enterprise, January 1943. Ed F. Hudson, who claimed he had been the editor of the 8th Center paper that printed the original claim, came forward saying saying he remembered the incident well. He was quoted as saying, "I always considered Alexander Hamilton was the real inventor of human flight because the story flew around the world and gained worldwide wide attention." His son Ben Hudson added the detail that his father and others had a weekly powwow where they would put the yarn together. These secondhand accounts and standalone versions are cited, but where are they written down? One would think that this would have put this particular over-the-top claim at rest once and for all, but as we all know, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and Perkins and I began to dig further into the story. I can find no published corroboration of Clark's various versions that the Hamilton claim was a joke, nor can I find any corroboration of the existence of a liars club in or near Leroy, Kansas, and I can find no sworn affidavit admitting his claim was a lie. The sworn and notarized affidavit above, signed by Hamilton's friends, all pillars of the community, legally suggests that the Liars Club scenario was not the case. To further ratchet up the intrigue surrounding Clark's assertion, it seems that the May 7th Kansas City Times article that Clark claims contain a sworn affidavit from Hamilton attesting to his lie is nothing more than a tongue-in-cheek description of Hamilton's supposed misidentification of a ludicrously mundane scenario as told to the editor of the Kansas City Times newspaper, who published his so-called mea culpa. So then we had that statement again. But I just want to say this. There's a lot of problems I have with the debunking scenario here. There's something else in the article, earlier in this article that was written by Clark. He talks about the family and what one of the granddaughter of Alexander Hamilton and what she believed. Here's what it says about that. Earlier in his article, before he asserts that it's a hoax, this is what it states. It says, "One could hardly ask for a more reliable witness to a UFO sighting. Over the years, the story was never quite forgotten, and from time to time, Kansas newspapers would revive it, featuring it as a marvelous episode from the old days. During the 1920s, an English nobleman wrote members of the Hamilton family. Alex himself had died in 1912, and said he was thinking of writing a book about it. Wallace Hamilton's daughter, Elizabeth Lind, who still lives in Yates Center, remembers that the story survived as a family legend and an inevitable topic of conversation at reunions. She says, 'We always believed it was a true story, but she does not remember ever hearing her father or grandfather discuss it.'" So, let me just stop here for a second. So, how could you say this story was debunked based on secondhand information from some 93-year-old woman, right? How, for one thing, she was 93 years old. How did we even know that that's who he was really corresponding with at the time? I don't understand that. Like, how do you know for sure that's who you received this letter from? I mean, because he puts a letter in this newspaper requesting if anybody else remembers anything, right? And then he receives a letter from somebody and he just accepts it as gospel. How do you know it wasn't somebody from the government sending the letter, just trying to make people not think about this story, not think about cattle mutilation? Because by 1976, right, guess what? Cattle mutilations was a big thing. It all started in 1967 when there was a horse mutilated. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then by 1976, of course, ranchers across the country, across the world actually, were looking for answers with regard to these cattle mutilations that were rampant, right? And they're still going on to this day, and nobody has any answers for them. I know what that is. I mean, I think I'm certain that what's going on with these cattle getting mutilated has something to do with this NHI presence, right? So I don't know, and that's another thing here. How could you trust this 93-year-old woman? You know, it makes me remember when Walter Haut, he was the press secretary at the Roswell Army Airfield back in 1947 when this whole Roswell incident occurred, when the UFO crashed and dead alien bodies were discovered, right? And he was someone that was always interviewed in documentaries, but he never wanted to share everything that he knew. So several years before he died, in 2002, he signed a sworn affidavit. At the time, he was 80 years old. He signed a sworn affidavit, right, stating that that not only did he know that there was a cover-up, but he actually saw the wreckage himself, and he also saw the alien bodies. He knew for a fact, right? He stated that in that affidavit that he signed. It was sealed until he died 3 years later in 2005. So when that came out, when that was unsealed, a lot of debunkers out there said stuff like, "Well, he was 80 years old. He wasn't of right mind at that time." Right. So how do we know this 93-year-old woman wasn't of right mind? I mean, she's a lot older. He was 80 when he did his signed affidavit. This 93-year-old woman, how do we know if she was of her right mind? We don't even know if she's real. if she really did send this stuff, or maybe she was making it up. How do you know? How does anybody know? This is all secondhand information. So I don't know how you could base it on this. And then as far as the other stuff, so you're going to tell me that some editor at this Yates newspaper back in 1897 went along with this hoax, published this stuff in his newspaper, and didn't say a word about it to anybody till 1943, almost 50 years later? I don't know if I believe that. Where's the evidence to all these things? Could they prove it? This is all secondhand nonsense and hearsay. So I'm not sure if I could rely on it. And one other thing I want to point out about Walter Haut. By the way, his family members then they stated that he was of sound mind when he signed that affidavit. I just want to point that out. But we have no idea about this other person here, this older 93-year-old woman who's claimed that it was all a hoax and there was a liars club, right? How do we know? How do we know? Right? And on top of it, if the family, here's the part that really I wonder about. Okay, so you have the granddaughter, the daughter of Wallace, who was 16 years old when this happened, right? Grew up. She was, by the time when she was contacted by Clark in 1976, right, or early 1977, right? At that, she was in her early 70s by this point, right? So she went through her whole life. People in her family, not just her apparently, they talked about it at reunions for their whole life. So she was in her early 70s, and they all believed the story was true. So the father, her father, and her grandfather never said a word never told the truth about this. Her grandmother was apparently, according to Elizabeth Stevie, knew it was a hoax too. And the whole family went on for decade after decade, generations apparently, believing that this story was true, and they would talk about it during family reunions. But yet these other people, these secondhand hearsay witnesses, are telling you all it was a hoax and there was a liars club. And on top of it, you have all of these people. You're going to tell me that all of these people, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, pharmacists, doctors, all these people, respected people, are going to sign an affidavit saying, oh, Alexander Hamilton's a trustworthy person and we believe him. They're going to go all along with this hoax, along with the guy that found this other guy that found the mutilated cow 3 or 4 miles away. There's more holes in the hoax explanation than in a block of Swiss cheese. It doesn't mean that the story is true, however. I'm just pointing it out. You can't just insist. Here's the sentence in that story from 1977. That gets me. And this is why all these years a lot of people believe it was a hoax. It is, however, a hoax. Okay, it is. It should have been. It could be a hoax. It might be a hoax, right? You don't know that for a fact. See, this is the problem when people. And here we're talking now. That's almost 50 years ago. That's all 50 years has gone by where people are thinking that this is most certainly a hoax. Period. Because of this one article. It is, however, a hoax. No, it could have been a hoax. We don't know. There's not enough evidence to say definitively that it was a hoax. There's just not enough evidence. However, I'm going to throw in some curveballs here in a minute. Now, the modern cattle mutilation story started in 1967. It started in 1967 with the mutilation of a horse named Snippy or Lady, whatever you want to call it. It had 2 different names apparently. One was a mistake, and whatever. Right? There was a horse that was found mutilated, and that's when people started realizing that, or people started recognizing that there's something weird going on here. And from that point forward, throughout the 1970s, 80s, 90s, all the way up right till today, there's been cattle mutilations. I've talked about recent ones in a show like a year ago in Colorado and other Midwest states, right? It's still happening to this day, and we have absolutely no explanation for it other than that the aliens are responsible, because I think that's what it is. We know that the aliens are here. We have the evidence now that shows that there's something here. There's more than enough evidence that we could safely say, yes, we are definitely not alone. All right, but let's revisit the Snippy case. Now, this was in 1967. I think this is important. It says, after 50 years, Snippy is still a mystery. And this is from the Alamosa News, okay? It says, the death of a horse 50 years ago put the San Luis Valley on the world map, and discussion continues today. The diary of an old family friend says it took place on September 27, 1967, while other accounts have the incident happening on other dates. A columnist for the Rocky Mountain News observed that Lady / Snippy had become more famous in death than Man o' War was in his prime. He also suggested the horse had tripped and fallen with its head in a band of cannibal ants. The only thing people can say for certain after the past 5 decades is that something killed Nellis Lewis's horse. The horse, an Appaloosa-named lady, was a creature of habit, so caregiver Harry King became concerned when she didn't come to the fence behind the King home for her water and usual treat. Harry lived with his aged mom, Agnes, then 87, and cared for the horse belonging to his sister, who lived in Alamosa. He went looking for the horse and found her lying on her side, with her head stripped bare to the bone. He said the precision cuts on the flank couldn't have come from a coyote or even a pack of them. A strong chemical smell akin to acetone lingered in the air. Nellie called a friend and then hurried to the ranch. What she found there is carved in the annals of history, embellished by many and featured in short films, folk legends, and books, which have brought fame and fortune to the authors, but no answers about the horse's death. The carcass was poked, prodded, and renamed Snippy, a name Nellie used for her horse from then on. The bizarre event, one of many that had been plaguing this sparsely populated San Luis Valley, began 50 years of mysteries. When Nellie and her husband Burl Lewis began walking around the grisly scene, the odor was still in the air and the bones appeared to have been exposed to the sun for years, though they had a pinkish cast. Although the carcass had lain exposed for several days, it was not bloated and the smell was not that of decomposition. No predators, vultures, or buzzards had found it appealing, though the flesh at the base of the neck was pliable. The horse's footprints ended about 100 feet from where the remains lay. No other prints were around. The Lewises found 15 burns that could be circular exhaust marks. 100 yards north of the carcass, they found a 3-foot bush and bushes within a 10-foot radius of the bush that had been flattened to within 10 inches of the ground. 6 indentations 2 inches across and 6 inches deep formed a circle 3 feet in diameter. On the bushes, Nellie found some gelatin-like green globs and a piece of metal covered with horsehair. After touching these, her hands began to burn and hurt until she could wash them. The only footprints around by then were those of people Nellie knew had been there. Nellie reported the incident to then Sheriff Ben Phillips, who declared the horse had been killed by lightning. Weather reports for the time period did not show any such activity. Dwayne Martin, a United States Forest Service employee, arrived with a Geiger counter and began testing. The area around the burn marks was radioactive, and so were the green globs and the horsehair wrapped metal object. Residents and visitors also reported strange phenomena. One man said his car was followed by a top-shaped object. A college student said both his rear tires blew out as he approached an object as it sat in a field, and 2 sheriff's deputies were followed by an orange globe, then threatened with their jobs if they wrote reports on it. Several days after the horse was found, police at the nearby Grand Sand Dunes found Dr. John Altschuler, an award-winning pathologist, trespassing on the monument after dark. When police lectured him about breaking the law, he begged to keep his name a secret, afraid his reason for being in the park would ruin his career if it came out. He was watching for UFOs. When the officers learned of Dr. Altschuler's area of expertise was in the study of blood coagulation, they decided to let him off the hook if he would take a ride out to Harry King's ranch and view the remains of a horse to see if he, a medical expert, could make some sense out of them. He found the animal's lungs, hearts, and thyroid were completely missing, removed with some of the cleanest cuts he had ever seen. The brain and abdominal organs were gone, he said, and there was no material in the spinal column. At the edges, the sliced skin was a deep black in color. Even stranger to him was the lack of blood. Many years later, as an old man, he told a reporter, "I have done hundreds of autopsies. You can't cut into a body without getting some blood." But there was no blood on the skin or the ground. No blood anywhere. The outer edges of the skin were cut firm, almost as if they had been cauterized by a modern-day laser. But there were no cauterizing laser technology like that in 1967. Okay, we'll just stop there. I'll leave the rest of the article. I'll leave links for everything so you can check these things out for yourself when you have the time if you're interested. But you get the point. That was the first one. That's when it began. That story became big news, and from that point on, there were lots of reports about cattle mutilations throughout the 1970s, throughout the 1980s, all the way up till right now. Right? It's never stopped. Right? Ranchers are still trying to figure out what's going on. You hear stories that it's Satanists. That's nonsense. Absolute ridiculous. Predators. What are they? Doctors? Are they walking around with the lasers? I mean, what are you talking about? Wolves with lasers? What are you saying? Okay, it's all nonsense. When you hear anybody telling you that, oh, it's the government, come on. Why would the government would have to do these kinds of things? Why would they do that? They could take this stuff on their own or buy their own animals and do it in private. That's all of these stories are nonsense. We all know what it is, right? We all know what it is. So to me, right, So by the mid 1970s, this was becoming a big deal. But this was a concern for people, and you would have to think it's a concern for people in the secret control group. How do we know? Maybe Jerome Clark was set up. Maybe he put that letter in that Yates newspaper right back in 1976, looking for some witnesses, and maybe some people in the CIA wrote them and pretended they were some 93-year-old woman, right, with a good memory. How do we know? We don't know. There's no all of this, and even if that's not true, I know that sounds ridiculous, but you don't know. I don't know. We really don't know, right? Is it on tape? Is it on video? Do we see this old lady talking, saying it was a liars club? And even so, what does it matter? How do we know how you're gonna take this secondhand information from somebody who says, "Oh, she happened to be visiting one day right when this incident happened, and yeah, I saw everything. I knew the whole story." Meanwhile, the rest of the whole family, Hamilton family, for generations believed it was true and brought it up during family reunions and thought the whole thing was not a hoax. Did not think that one for once until they were told so in the mid '70s. So that's the problem. Some of the problems I have with the hoax theory. I don't buy it. I don't think there's enough information there to say it was a hoax. And here's the thing, though. I mean, the issue here is Alexander Hamilton's story actually jives with the cases that would happen later on. I mean, even in his affidavit that he signed, what happened was another guy found his cow 3 or 4 miles away from where it was stolen. There were no footprints around it, right? There was so just like the cases we have today. I mean, if Alexander Hamilton was making it up, then maybe he was a prophet. Then he could see the future. He saw what was coming. I mean, to me, I think that there's a stronger possibility that this incident from 1897 was real. And here's the other interesting aspect of it. It was just 2 days before April 17th when something allegedly crashed in Aurora, Texas. And I just want to mention this. I think it's important. Of course, we all know this. There was an article that appeared in a Dallas newspaper a few days after this. Actually, it appeared on April 19th, right? And the same day as Alexander Hamilton's incident, right? But in a Dallas newspaper. And by the way, if anyone has any ideas that maybe Alexander Hamilton read this article and then decided to make up the story because of that, the distance between these places, Dallas or Aurora, it's over 400 miles to Leroy, Kansas. I already did the math, right? So I don't believe that. I can't see that. I can't see that being the case, that he saw that. Oh, maybe I'll come up with my own story. No, I don't believe that, right? But don't worry, I do have a curveball to throw into this whole story in a couple of minutes here. Okay, but anyway, let's read this story. Let's read this article that was written by somebody named a correspondent named S.E. Hayden back in the day. He wrote, about 6 o'clock this morning, the early risers of Aurora were astonished at the sudden appearance of the airship, which had been sailing through the country. It was traveling due north and much nearer the earth than ever before. Evidently, some of the machinery was out of order, for it was making a speed of only 10 or 12 miles an hour and gradually settling toward the earth. It sailed directly over the public square, and when it reached the north part of town, collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and went to pieces with a terrific explosion, scattering debris over several acres of ground, wrecking the windmill and water tank, and destroying the judge's flower garden. The pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains are badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Mr. T.J. Weems, the United States Signal Service officer at this place and an authority on astronomy, gives it as his opinion that he was a native of the planet Mars. Papers found on his person, evidently the record of his travels, are written in some unknown hieroglyphics and cannot be deciphered. The ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to its construction or motive power. It was built of an unknown metal resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver, and it must have weighed several tons. The town is full of people today who are viewing the wreck and gathering specimens of the strange metal from the debris. The pilot's funeral will take place at noon tomorrow. And there was another follow-up article that appeared in a different paper where apparently the funeral already took place. Okay, and we know the funeral took place because we know the grave, it's still there. There's a grave there. And in 1973, as we a lot of people already know, a lot of UFO researchers caught wind of this story, and they all started investigating it. There was some people that wanted to exhume the grave to see that would have the proof of an alien body if it really happened. But the townspeople, the Christians, the religious people that were in charge of the church association, they did not want anyone to go digging up any graves in the cemetery, and they actually had people on guard at that cemetery to make sure it didn't happen. And then when they stopped guarding it, what happened was somebody apparently went in there and stole everything that was in there. One of the investigators of the case, a guy named Bill Case, he had used a metal detector when the story first broke in 1973, when everyone was talking about it. He used a metal detector, and there was metal in that grave. Apparently, not only was the body thrown in there, but there were pieces of metal from the craft that were thrown in there. And when he used his metal detector, it gave a signal. But then somebody went in there, and all of a sudden there was no metal there anymore. The metal detector did not didn't sense anything there, right? And there were holes dug in the ground. These tube-like holes going into the grave. Apparently they stuck some sort of suction devices in these holes and sucked everything out. And then on top of it, the headstone, which showed like a craft on it, was stolen on top of it. But you can still go visit Aurora, Texas. They have a monument in that cemetery. It's something that people still talk about there. So you had that happening, and then 2 days later you had this incident with Alexander Hamilton, right? Now, I'm going to throw in the curveball. Now, I talked about this before. I know when I was talking about this Aurora crash, like I wondered in my head, now you had this airship mystery going on since 1896, okay? People were seeing all these airships all over the place. And I wondered, 1897, and wasn't that around the time when H.G. Wells came out with War of the Worlds? I wondered if there was a chance that maybe that's what inspired some of the story for the Aurora crash, for instance. Maybe somebody read that book and it came out, and all of a sudden now that they decided to attach the airship mystery to this War of the Worlds and come up with their own story. Hence the Aurora airship crash. But when I initially looked into it, I found that it wasn't published in book form until 1898, and that it was initially published in serialized format beginning at sometime in 1897 in a British publication called Pearson's Magazine. But I didn't realize that simultaneously it was getting published in America. Serialized version. They broke it up into like 9 parts, and every month in Cosmopolitan you got to read the next part of the War of the Worlds. That's how it was originally. The story was originally presented to the public in these magazines in England and in America. Cosmopolitan in America and Pearson's in England. And I was thinking, well, yeah. At the time, I didn't realize about the Cosmopolitan one, but the very first part of War of the Worlds was in Cosmopolitan in April of 1897, and in that first part I actually found the copy of Cosmopolitan online, and here it is. In that first part it talks about the creatures, the Martians, the landing, and actually early in that book, if anyone's ever read it, it also talks about aliens coming out of a craft. In fact, here's a little section from the story that was in Cosmopolitan appeared in Cosmopolitan in April of 1897. A big grayish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like oiled silk. 2 large dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. It was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. The body heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder. Another swayed in the air. So, the first part of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds appeared in Cosmopolitan in April of 1897, the same month as the crash in Aurora, Texas, which was April 17th, and the Alexander Hamilton cattle kidnapping / mutilation, the same month. So I guess some people in the debunker side could say, well, maybe that inspired these guys, these stories to be invented. Maybe that's what it was, right? Maybe that's what it was. I just think it's, it's important to point all of these things out. Does that prove anything? Could it be a coincidence? You can't prove, it doesn't prove anything, but I think it's important to point these things out. So, and here's the other thing. I mean, back then, mail traveled very slowly in 1897. It would take, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks till somebody got something. If you're living in the middle of Kansas, it might take you a lot longer to get the latest edition of Cosmopolitan in those days. Or if you're living in the middle of Aurora, Texas, right, it's going to take you maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that issue of Cosmopolitan reached your doorstep. We don't even know what part of the month they started sending it out. We just know that it was the April 1897 edition of Cosmopolitan. We don't know what were the dates changed from the research that I did. The dates when these Cosmopolitan magazines were released, they're different every month. It wasn't the same day. We don't know. It could have been in the middle of the month, could have been the end of the month, could have been the beginning of the month. So is it possible? Is it possible that maybe people in Aurora, maybe that reporter saw that story and then they contrived this whole idea of a wreck? Is that possible? Is it possible that Alexander Hamilton read War of the Worlds and, knowing that all these people are seeing airships, decided to make his own little story up and have all these people be part of it? Is that possible? That's what you have to ask yourself. I don't think it is, but I think it's just a coincidence, but it's something we should point out, right? Most certainly. But I also have one other curveball I want to throw at you, okay? This is from an article that talks about this case, the Alexander Hamilton case, that's on a website called UFOnut.com. And this is what he writes, okay? He writes about the Alexander Hamilton incident, and then he talks about something else that happened the year prior. And this was something that was also reported in Fate magazine in 1986. He writes, "If that story wasn't enough, in volume 38, number 11 of Fate magazine's issue, November of 1985, was printed a story called Cattle Killing UFO of 1896. 1 year before Hamilton's story, in August of 1896 in Howell County, Missouri, a family experienced a UFO encounter. Here are excerpts from the Fate magazine article. All at once we saw flashing lights. At first we thought they were a star shower, but the stars stayed in a circle as if they were all strung together like beads. The circle of lights just kept whirling and falling toward us. I ran to my mother and clung to her skirts, crying and shaking so hard that I could barely stand. It stopped and hovered over the barn. We could see it. It was a large saucer-like shape. Its lights were blinding. The whole barn lot lit up like day. My father grabbed up the baby who was sleeping on a pallet and we fled into the house. The next morning when Ben took his dog Cappy and went out to the pasture to bring up the milk cows, as he always did, he came running back to the house scared out of his wits. In a large patch of burned grass were 3 of our steers lying dead on the ground. The father then examined the steers and noticed they were completely drained of blood." So, and as we all know, what that means, what happens in these cases, cattle mutilation cases, and this happened in 1896. It involved a UFO, and the next day they found 3 cows completely drained of blood. That phenomenon is still happening today. And the other thing about this, I mean, all of the aspects of Alexander Hamilton's account, right? These things is what, for the most part, have been getting described today. He's talking about beings in a craft, hideous people. He didn't know if they were devils or angels. He wasn't talking about people from Mars. He didn't know if they were devils, angels, or what. But I will point out that T.J. Weems, and the astronomer who was mentioned in the article with regard to the Aurora crash, he said that he thought it was from somebody from Mars, which happened to be the same month as the release of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, where it was described, a Martian was described. Okay, but anyway, here this article provides some of the details of what usually you find in a cattle mutilation case. Animal is picked up at location A, then mutilated at location B, then placed at location C. Animal is found with unusual lesions and lack of blood. Animal appears to have been dropped or placed. No animal struggle evidence found. No predator takedown evidence found. No human evidence found. No tracks of any kind. Sometimes strange lights are seen in the area before and even after the mutilation. So, a lot of different curveballs to throw in there at this. So, this has been going on. Now, this story here apparently wasn't widely reported like the Alexander Hamilton's case, right? This one wasn't. But it did happen in 1896. It was in Fate magazine in 1985. I don't have a copy of that magazine, so I'm just going by what this author is reporting here. But there you go. I mean, it's hard to make heads or tails about actually the Alexander Hamilton case, and also even the Aurora case. I do think that the Aurora case happened. I'll tell you why. The reason I just can't believe, I can't make myself believe that highly religious people in 1897 would create a phony grave for a phony story. Be part of a lie, a fake Christian burial, have a headstone there. Why would you? I can't see that. People like that don't do things like that. That's right. I just don't believe that. That's the issue I have with that. And then on top of it, I mean, there was airship. Were there hoaxes going on? Most definitely. There were just way too many stories. A lot of them were very, very fanciful, right? But these stories, the Aurora one as well as the Alexander Hamilton one, they feature elements that were happening we would see later on. I mean, starting with the Snippy case, the Snippy lady case from 1967, moving forward, this is what happens. They're dropped. There's no footprints around it. Predators don't want to go near them. Blood is drained completely. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I mean, if Alexander Hamilton made that up, then he was a prophet then. I mean, because he foresaw what was going to happen. That's why I have trouble believing. And I can't believe that you could get 12 other respected citizens, other lawyers, justices of the peace, the sheriff, the deputy sheriff, and all these guys to sign this sworn affidavit saying the guy's telling the truth. We believe him, right? I can't see that happening. Right? I just don't believe that. I don't believe all these people would be involved themselves in such a hoax like this. And then the whole family, their whole lives, that lady was 70 years old when it's like 72 she would have been, when Jerome Clark contacts her and she says, we thought the story was true. We've been talking about it at family reunions, right? So they all believed it. So why would the Alexander Hamilton, his son Wallace, not ever, or the mother, not tell anybody else in the family and let this just story, propagate through the decades? Why not say, oh, it was a hoax? He just made it up. Why didn't they tell the truth? Why did these other people know about that it was a hoax, right? That weren't connected. Actually, that guy, that Hudson guy, his name wasn't on that affidavit. Are we even sure he was an editor there? I mean, there's just not enough evidence. All of it is like hearsay kind of evidence and secondhand testimony. We just don't know, right? You can't say with absolute certainty that it was a hoax. I think there's more evidence, just like the Redditor indicated. There's more evidence, just like Christopher O'Brien in his book Stalking the Herd indicated. I think there's more evidence leaning in the direction that it was a real event. That's my belief. Doesn't make me right, but there are some curveballs in there. It's just really funny, isn't it? That month, April, that was the first installment of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine. Is it possible that those guys read it and then decided to, that inspired them to turn these stories, these airship stories, into something a little bit more exciting? Is it possible? Yes, it is. You can't say with 100% one way or the other. That's the whole bottom line, I think, here. I don't think you could. I think personally, it did happen, the Alexander Hamilton incident. I personally believe it did happen. I personally believe it was real, based on what we were just talking about here. Are there issues with it? Of course there are. There's lots of different questions. It's still mysterious. It's still controversial. And the same thing goes with the Aurora, Texas incident, right? Same thing. The same deal. Okay, moving on, I have one more thing to talk about here. I'm sorry to report that recently I got to say I've been doing pretty well on YouTube recently. I've been getting a lot more subscribers. A lot of new subscribers are showing up on here, and I really appreciate it. However, there's always that percentage, or 5% or less, where you get these trolls giving you some stuff, right? And of course, as everyone knows, in the past, every now and then I make an example of a troll and I send them to the cornfield. Recently, though, because of the greater number of people on commenting, that small percentage, there's just more people. So I've been sending people to the cornfield a lot. And now, unfortunately, it's full up. Okay, there's no more vacancy there. So I had to invent a new place to send these people. Who are these people? You got to wonder. You got to ask yourself. That's what I'm wondering. Like, for one thing, who are these people that they're trolls? They don't provide any sort of they don't really offer anything toward these conversations that we're having that you see in the comments section when we're talking about these things we're talking about, right? They're obviously trolls. They're, who are they? I mean, we don't know who they are. I mean, they could be just your, some random dullard sitting on a park bench who doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, right? It could be something like that. It could be a debunker who's working with the CIA, who's creating a whole bunch of bots, and all those bots in turn just provide kind of comments that try to sow doubt in people's mind. They're sitting in an office somewhere, or maybe it's the debunker himself. Some pimple puss punk sitting in an office with some government agents, and they're just pumping out nonsense to try to sow doubt in people's minds. There could be some man-child who's living in his mom's basement, living off her Social Security, doesn't have a job, doesn't know what he's doing. Could be someone like that, just sitting there eating pizzas all day, sleeping until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then going to bed at 5 in the morning. I mean, could be something like that. Didn't work. He's probably 30 years old, didn't have a job, in 10 years. Or when he gets a job, he quits within a week, or maybe within hours. Could be one of those. Could be one people. These are who I imagine doing it, right? These are the kind of people, the trolls, that would do something like that. Or it could be just sheep, right? Dumb sheep who believe everything the corridor crew tells them, right? It could be just people like that. We don't know, right? So with that in mind, unfortunately, the cornfield of pure idiocy has closed, and I have a new place to send these people. Welcome to another installment of The Black Hole That's Really Stupid, your favorite netherworld where we send dummies and trolls to spend the rest of time to ponder their abject stupidity. Today's guilty party is YouTube user Richard Dealstra2398, who said in the comments section for an episode about the 2-year anniversary of the Las Vegas alien case the following: "What a BS story, nothing to see, could be everything." I think he meant anything. "Not any sign of an alien. Next." Well, guess what, Richard? It's next for you, too. Obviously, this person has no place here, and so off he goes. Goodbye. And when you get to the center, say hello to my little singularity. Anyway, I just want to say this. I'm going to say thank you all for joining me today. Until next time.